Okay, I thought what I would do is just talk for a few minutes about how this got started, because I never intended to do anything for publication. My hobby is genealogy and history. I love research, and I do a lot of family stories and memoirs and whatnot, and so never thought I would come to this. So in talking, I'm reminded of a story that my father always told. It's particularly significant at this convention, I think. He loved to tell stories, and he said that once Mark Twain was invited to make a speech, and he said, how long a speech? And they said, well, does it make any difference? He says, well, if I'm going to speak for 5 minutes, I have to have at least a month, 6 weeks to prepare. If I'm going to speak for half an hour, I can do it in a couple of weeks, but if I've got an hour, I'm ready now. I'm not going to do that. Another friend asked me how long I had, and I said an hour, and he said, you're not going to have any trouble filling that. And I said, are you flattering me, or is that a slam? So I'm going to start right now. I'm only going to begin. This all really started because I volunteer at my hometown library, and some of you may be familiar. The library gathers a lot of books, so they have the ones they want to give away, and they have a sale, and then those people who use the libraries a lot feel like they want to give back, help out with the sale. So I was collecting money at the end, and someone left with some stack of books that my father had written, and I said, oh, you're a fan. My father wrote those books, and she genuflected. And her husband said, what was it like to grow up with a bunch of nuts? Well, I got to thinking, and I thought, I didn't grow up with a bunch of nuts. And I thought, we had an extremely conventional family. I grew up in a rural town in Southern Virginia. My father was very much a Southern gentleman, of the seersucker suits and so forth. And in fact, as I tell in the memoir, he always wore a coat and tie, no matter how hot it was, and we didn't have air conditioning in those. So here he'd be working at home in his coat and tie. So I thought, this is really strange. And then I got to thinking, well, it's kind of unusual, though. We grew up with magazines like this lying around. And we had paintings on the wall that had been covers of strange robots and oozing figures. We never even gave it a thought, so I guess that was kind of strange. It wasn't strange that he was home all the time, because it was a farming community. Most people's fathers were home all the time. The really odd thing about us was that we were a Catholic family, the only one in the county, and that wasn't even a big deal either. Didn't seem to matter too much, except once in a while when they had an election, as I tell in the book, and Al Smith was running for president against Herbert Hoover. And the next door family across the field was a Jewish family, and they were the only Jewish family in the county. But still, that wasn't even a big deal there. So it just seemed like, what is this about the nuts? And then I got to thinking that, here's a story. Here's a man who, for 50 years, was writing about these strange things, and he was inventing strange things, but it seemed very ordinary. And then I got to thinking, most of the science fiction people that I met and talked to and all, they're really, ordinary people. They happen to like science fiction, and they happen to be creative people, but they're certainly not a bunch of nuts. So then I got to thinking some more about it, and I began to tell his story. And I guess my mission was to say that these are just, really very interesting, creative people, but aren't a bit strange. He started out like in one of his stories, the nameless one, I believe it is, maybe some of you read it, about Bud Gregory, and this is a story that he developed from something he had heard that was supposed to be true. Whether it was or not, I don't know, but about a young man from the sticks who walked into Harvard University and said, you know, I've been kind of fooling around, I found something interesting. And he explained to the math professor about how he discovered logarithms. Well, you know, somebody was ahead of him, but that's pretty interesting that someone with no education and would just come up and had discovered logarithms. So I think that there are a lot of creative people out there, and a lot of them are science fiction fans, because basically what attracts people to science fiction is the creativity, to the science aspects, and when you're getting into strange worlds and aliens and so forth, it's all part of the what if, what's out there, you know, what if somebody's out there and what would they be like. So these are people who are not nuts, they're just people who want to know what's going on out there. Now Dad started, I think it was kind of interesting. Most boys wanted to be firemen, maybe. And when he was 12 years old, I guess, well, he got the idea that he wanted to be a writer. And he pursued it. First, again, the story many people have heard was the story of how in a class he wrote an essay about Robert E. Lee, which is in the book. And the superintendent thought it was so excellent that it was printed in the evening paper, and the Confederate veteran thought it was so great that he gave him $5. This was in 1909. $5 was a few bucks then. And then he took the money and he built a glider. And he'd gotten the idea because in 1909, when he was 13 years old, he was an avid reader of the first aeronautical magazine in the country, Fly. And he wrote letters to them, and he told them of an invention he had about propulsion to fly an airplane, help an airplane take off, and he wrote a little poem, and he wrote the whole story about how he built this glider, which he flew off the Cape Henry lighthouse, Cape Henry, where the lighthouse was. But and he made it, and he invented enough to make it collapsible and take it apart, so he could take it down there on the trolley. So again, he was a person who was creative, and I went to a presentation this afternoon, and I believe it was David Hartwell who talked about that people never wanted to be a hack, and that gave me some thought for tonight. Also, that I wanted to bring out that Dad always said, "I'm not a hack writer. I'm a professional, like a plumber is a professional." And so this beginning of his career, when he decided, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to make my living writing, and to do that, he had to write what people would buy. You have to write to sell. So over 50 years, which I think was phenomenal. It was not that he wrote and sold stories, but he was able to tailor his writing to what was going to sell. Now, you know, we can be artists. On the other hand, we can support ourselves. And by writing to sell, that's what he was meeting his own goal. On the other hand, what's really significant in his story is that he always wrote science fiction, although it was probably 10% of his work from 1919 until the end of his life. He called it a hobby. And although it did sell, but it paid very little. It's what's endured, it's what people remember him for. You might make $50 selling a science fiction story in the 50s. You wrote a story for Collier's or Saturday Evening Post, you made $1,000.